Once she was delivered up to Finn's court, Grania took one look at Finn and decided to take matters into her own hands. She gave everyone a cup with a sleeping draught in it, except Dermot. Then she bound him under powerful, magical taboos to run away with her. The loyal Dermot did his best to talk her out of the plan, but he couldn't, so he found himself on the run from Finn McCool with Grania in tow, or maybe it would be fairer to say that she had him in tow. Here we are at the final part of this rambling exploration of pigs, heather, hunting, and heroes. If you haven't watched the first two videos, I recommend it. The links are in the show notes, and if you want to follow the trail of stories and other good things I've been sharing, and all the sources that I used to put this series together, you can download a PDF with the links from my Patreon. The links to do that are in the show notes as well. Joining my Patreon helps me to keep making videos, and you get a few extras too. But if that's too much commitment, you can buy me a cuppa on Ko-fi at the link on your screen. All this talking is thirsty work. Before I try to draw the threads of these stories together, I want to look at one more story, the story of Dermad and Grana. I won't tell the whole story, but you can find links to read it on that famous PDF. Dermot has an interesting backstory. He's not a prince. He's not trying to gain a kingdom, but his start in life is worth paying attention to. Dermot's father was Down O'Donkera. Now, that's an interesting name which has associations with darkness, perhaps with some kind of underworld or land of the dead, maybe a name which is a relic from an earlier layer of mythology. As a child, Dermot was given to Angus to foster. Dermot's half-brother from the same mother was fathered by Roch MacDeacon, Angus's steward, and that child was also fostered with Angus. People were naturally aware of the differing status of the two boys. Dermot was of noble lineage, but the son of Roch was not. Now, Finn and Down visited the brew, and Down, being jealous because the two boys were treated equally, found an opportunity to kill the steward's son. But it turned out that the steward Roch had some magical knowledge. He used this magical knowledge to turn his dead son into a young pig and declared that the length of his son's life would be the same as Dermot's. When Angus heard that, he put a gesh on Dermot never to hunt swine, because clearly, if he were to accidentally kill his foster brother in his swine form, it would end his own life. As a grown man, Dermot was known for being exceedingly handsome, to the point that this caused jealousy among the Fianna. He had a sort of mole or beauty mark, which was said to fascinate women, so that they couldn't help but fall in love with him. As for Dermot, he found that more of a curse than a blessing, as it only seemed to cause him trouble. Now, by this time, Finn McCool was an old man, still strong and wily as ever, still popular with his men, but hardly in the flowering of his youth. But he needed a wife, and the wife his men found for him was Grania, the daughter of Cormac MacEart. Grania was young and beautiful and hopeful of getting a husband who could match that. Once she was delivered up to Finn's court, Grania took one look at Finn and decided to take matters into her own hands. She gave everyone a cup with a sleeping draught in it, except Dermot. Then she bound him under powerful, magical taboos to run away with her. The loyal Dermot did his best to talk her out of the plan, but he couldn't, so he found himself on the run from Finn McCool with Grania in tow, or maybe it would be fairer to say that she had him in tow. Then there follows one of the most famous tales of Irish mythology, the pursuit of Dermad and Grana. Finn and his men pursue the couple mercilessly for years through many exciting and heroic episodes. They're often helped by Angus, Dermot's foster father, to escape just in time. But Dermot's own heroism and prowess is also front and center in these adventures. And it's that part that I suggest you read for yourself if you want to. However, there's one episode which is worth looking at. After they've been on the run for some time, Dermot is tricked into performing a feat of the sort he's well known for. He meets some men who have tried to make peace with Finn over a past feud. Finn has demanded either Dermot's head or berries from a certain Rowan tree. It's called a quicken tree in the story, but quicken and Rowan both refer to the same tree. Finn has told them that they won't be able to take Dermot's head due to his fighting prowess. But he says they won't get the berries either because they're guarded by a monstrous giant who nobody dares come near. These fellows decide that the best plan is to try to trick Dermot into getting the berries for them. Either they'll get the berries or Dermot will get killed. Then they can take his head. However, Dermot manages to overcome the two men, but Grania, having overheard their conversation, now demands the berries for herself. After a hard fight with the giant, Dermot kills him, and everyone gets some magical berries, including the two defeated men. Unfortunately, their return to Finn with the berries gives Dermot's location away, so the chase is on once more. Finally, after 16 years, Angus's attempts to make peace between Finn and Dermot bear fruit. Dermot and Grania can breathe a sigh of relief, but they continue to live apart from the Fianna, raising a family. Finally, Grania decides to hold a feast for her royal relations and for Finn and his men. The preparations are made, but the night before the feast, Dermot hears the cry of a hunting dog in his dreams, and in the morning he decides to investigate. Grania counsels him to take his most supernaturally charged weapons, but he chooses lesser ones and leaves, taking his dog with him. Soon he meets Finn, who tells him that some of the Fianna rose in the night to hunt the boar of Ben Gulban, and that the boar has killed 30 men. So let's get out of here, Finn advises. When Dermot says that he isn't afraid, Finn reminds him of his gesh against hunting swine. So Dermot agrees and asks Finn to lend him his favorite hound, Bran, for his protection, but Finn refuses. At this point, Dermot suspects, or maybe realizes, that he's been set up and decides to face his fate. Soon the boar appears as Dermot laments the foolishness of his choice of weapons. He looses his hound, who's no match for the boar, then hurls his spear, which is useless, against it. He tries his sword, and it breaks against the boar's thick hide. He then fights it bare-handed, leaping and being thrown until he's near death. Then Finn and the other Fianna find him. Finn has the power to heal by giving someone a drink from the palm of his hands. Dermot begs him for help. Twice Finn taunts him by bringing the water, then letting it flow through his fingers. The third time, Finn's heart softens, but he arrives at Dermot's side too late. He's dead. News soon reaches Angus. Arriving on Ben Gulban, Angus and his people raise a terrible cry, so that you'd have thought the heavens would split open. The boar of Ben Gulban with fierceness hath laid low Dermot the bright-faced. Raise ye fairy shouts without gainsaying. Let Dermot of the bright weapons be lifted by you to the smooth brew of the everlasting rocks. Surely it is we that feel great pity. Angus takes Dermot's body home to the brew, saying, "Since I cannot restore him to life, I will send a soul into him so that he may talk to me each day." That's not quite the end of the story, but it's good enough for us. Once again, Angus features in the story, and again with Rock's son in a fostering position of a boy turned into a pig, which is ultimately hunted, a bit like the swine of Drevru. Meanwhile, Dermot, the foster brother of the boar, is hunted by Finn. It's almost as if Dermot and the boar who kills him are two sides of the same coin. And did you notice the dangerous business with the Rowan berries? Did it remind you of Frech gathering the Rowan berries for Mev and Aliel in his story? It's just another odd little connection. Over the past two videos, we looked at the story of the boar hunt in Killoch and Olwen and took note of how that story is linked to one in the Irish Dinhenachus, in which Angus tries to protect some pigs who were once humans, who were in the care of Angus' lover, Drevru. Two of the pigs in that story have cognate names in Killoch and Olwen. One is cognate with Killoch himself, a name which means slender pig. The other is called Frechan, which is cognate with the talkative piglet Griggan in Killoch and Olwen. These two names both mean little heather. And that's how we arrived at the story of Frech last time, because I wondered whether his story was somehow linked due to his heathery name. I'm going to take us back to Killoch and Olwen for a bit. There are two characters who are important to us here. The first is Kilhuch, whose name means young, slender pig, who's born in a pigsty, and whose destiny is entangled with the Tuath Truith, the giant evil boar. The other is Mabon, who is a reflex of Maponos, a deity connected to hunting, among other things. Kilhuch and Olwen is, in one sense, a sovereignty tale. Kilhuch is delivered the strange fate of trying to win Olwen from her horrible giant father, Ysbyddaden. Ysbyddaden, we learn, has a beard and hair so tough and bristly that it's impossible to care for, making him a sort of human double of the bristly old boar, Truith. He's clearly unfit to rule. Crops go unsown in his kingdom, which has become infested with various hags, monstrous boar, and other evils, which he fails to control. The point of hunting the Truith, we're told, is not exactly to kill the boar, but to capture the comb, razor, and scissors lodged in his bristles, the only barbering tools capable of grooming Ysbyddaden for his daughter's wedding to Kilhuch, the wedding at which he knows he'll be beheaded. If we take Kilhuch as some kind of medieval burlesque and nothing more, then that gets a laugh. But the underground roots of the story seem to run in all sorts of directions, back to Maponos, to various stories featuring Angus in Ireland, and in a few places we haven't even talked about. Kilhuch can be a satire, stories full of humor, and still have ancient connections, though. Both things can be true. The humor is like walnuts in a cake. They make the cake more fun, but it's still basically made of cake. Myself and a group of my patrons wrestled with these stories for 5 months earlier in the year. My hopes for finding a clear, system to these stories or some well-defined truth about Maponos and his reflexes continued to elude us. Although we considered a bunch of possibilities, here's what I've been thinking, but it's very hypothetical. Maybe somewhere there's a prototype story about a boar hunt that all these stories are built on. Maybe it's from the earliest strata of Celtic-speaking culture, or a bit older, or a bit newer than that. It doesn't matter, and I'm not going to try to reconstruct the myth. But I think it might tell us, just maybe, about something that used to happen. Not an absolute cultural norm that every early Celtic-speaking people always did, but something that was remembered or well known and contributed to a good story, perhaps played out many times, or just on one or two very memorable occasions. Celtic-speaking groups probably didn't all have the same method of choosing their leaders, but it seems to have been usual that they were chosen from among close relatives of the current leader, maybe sometimes by that leader who picked his successor, maybe with a bit of democracy among the nobles thrown in, maybe with some kind of test as well. Physical fitness, battle prowess, wisdom, wiliness, approval by the druid class, prophecy. Based on what we know, all of these things could play their part. It was never just one thing. Remember Cormac's glossary statement. A king is called Thriath. A king's son is called Ortreth, a king's piglet. What if hunting a boar was one way of testing a likely contender for kingship? Yet, fierce as boars are, lots of lads would be pretty handy with a spear in these days. But what if this testing took a slightly different form? Picture a group of mature, experienced hunters. They capture a boar, maybe by digging a pit, and somehow they subdue it enough to tie something to it. Some prize, like a torque, or maybe just a token, like a flag or ribbon. Then, at the appointed time, the boar is freed, and the candidate is sent not to kill the boar, but to capture the prize, which is a much greater test of skill, both mental and physical, than just throwing a spear at it. This is just a theory, but even if it's not precisely how things went, I think it could be close to the inspiration for the story. This isn't about bringing back food for the tribe. This is about being impressively skillful. It may also be about having connections like kin and fosterage bonds, and about being rich enough to assemble the right hunting party with good horses and good dogs, and having the friendship or willing cooperation of a hunting deity like Mabon. That could come in very useful. Angus isn't really represented as a hunter, but he seems to watch over many a young, slender pig, whether that's Frechan, who just wants to get back to his human form before Mev's hunt catches up with him, or Dermot, who meets his fate on Ben Bulben. Why are these stories all so different? Some don't even have a proper boar hunt, such as the story of Pryderi's death in the fourth branch. They're different because Celtic culture isn't just one thing, whether through migration or diffusion or other means, probably through many means. Celtic languages and ways of doing things became varied, even fragmented. An old story would naturally come to mean whatever made sense to a particular language group in a particular place and time. So we get huge sagas like Mabon and Owain or The Pursuit of Dermad and Grana, and odd little snippets like the pigs who come out of the cave of the cats and are impossible to count. Undoubtedly, there are exceptions to this, but I'm struck by how many of these stories feature a character who seems to be, based on other evidence, a reflex of Maponos, Mabon, Pryderi, Angus, and possibly even Frech, maybe as a kind of stand-in. In the Book of Taliesin, there's a wild and confusing poem called News Has Reached Me from the Chalklands. The poem isn't about hunting boar, but raiding cattle. The raider seems to be Owain ap Urien, who is sometimes also reflexive of Mabon ap Modron, because Owain's mother is also said to be Modron. The poem has all the chaos, excitement, and violence of a cattle raid. It's hard to make sense of exactly what's taking place. Both Owain and Mabon are mentioned frequently. Battle near a bright place, leader of a godly line, the shield in his hand, protects in attack. Whoever saw Mabon and his fierce white horse riding among Reged's cattle? They couldn't flee unless they could fly from Mabon without bloodshed and dead bodies. From descent on a fray to the start of a battle, Mabon's men spreading out can't be resisted. When Owain came down for his father's cattle, limewash and wax and splinters exploded. So that last line is describing lime-washed shields made of wood being destroyed in the battle. There's been a lot of discussion about whether Mabon ap Modron, as a god or a mortal, is really even in this poem, because Owain had a cousin called Mabon ap Idno, and he's also in this poem. But scholars like Jenny Rowland, Frank Olding, and John Cook have all suggested the possibility of Mabon as a cult figure around the Solway Firth, where Maponos once held sway. Perhaps Mabon somehow becomes synonymous with the kings and princes of Reged. I suspect that many of the mentions of Mabon in the poem actually point to Owain, who may be seen as embodying Mabon. When the army of Erechwydd returned from the country of the Clydwys, no cow lowed for its calf. The manifestation of Mabon from the other realm in the battle where Owain fought for the cattle of his country. I think this poem and the taking of the comb and the razor from the Turk Trith in the River Severn embodies a similar spirit. And coming back there from the Severn, Turk Trith was then waylaid by the veteran warriors of the island, and he was driven by sheer force into the Severn. And Mabon, son of Modron, went with him on Gwyn Mungddwn, and Gorai, son of Castennan, and Menu, son of Tairgwaed, between Llynlliwen and Abergwy. And first they seized hold of him by his feet, and then they ducked him in the Severn until the water was washing over him. Mabon, son of Modron, spurred his steed from one side and got the razor from him. Coledir the Wild, on another steed, went for him from the other side of the Severn and took the shears. And why shouldn't a god of the hunt also be a god of the cattle raid? When battle was caused, he was lord, king, and dragon. Cattle were wild, but not panicked by Mabon from a clash with a pack of men. Men fell at noon defending their land when Owain marched out for blessed Erechwydd's sake, a raid which was toasted by his father. It just goes to show that the idea is versatile and portable. In one story, The slender pig is a king's son, seeking to wed the princess and take her father's kingdom. In another, he may be a hapless fosterling, beset by taboos or cursed to live as a pig. In another setting, the king's son and heir embodies Mabon as he proves his worth by raiding cattle far and wide. I've got classes starting soon about Mabon and about Lugus, the Triads of Britain, and stories of animal transformation. Plus, I've got a short session called The Mysteries of Mabon. There are some free tickets for that one while they last. Go get them. I'd love to see you there or in one of my classes. Bye for now.